Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! It is time for my monthly look at the 9th edition of Warhammer 40k. This month, I start by taking a look at our two new codexes. Codex Space Marines and Codex Necrons. Now, I'm not going to be going into these into the codexes themselves individually, because that would just be making it look like more of a review of them. Instead, what I'm going to be talking about is how they're organized, because there's details in this that's useful for both experienced players and new players. In fact, some of this feedback is actually coming from helping a new player trying to learn to use the codexes to build their army. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as I talk about our new 9th edition codexes. So, starting at page 3 in the Space Marine Codex until page 77 is all the background and fluff material for them. They're discussing the different chapters that are covered in here, and the history of the Space Marines. Doesn't go into the details of the process of making Space Marines themselves like older editions did. It doesn't have the nice old diagram of each organ when it goes in, for example. Starting at page 78 and going a good bit further to page 89 is a whole bunch of pictures showing different ways to paint them, different looks for the different chapters and successor chapters and all that. Now, starting at page 80 is the rules. Now, here is what makes this edition different. You have different types of rules now. First, you have the overall rules talking about a Battleforge army. These are your detachment abilities, the options for what it's called chapter command, and stratagems. Then you have the army rules themselves, the Warlord traits, relics, the two disciplines that all Space Marines have access to, the Librarius discipline and the Obscuration discipline, and the litanies of battle that the chaplains have access to. Then you have a little bit of rules that is the extra secondary objectives that Space Marines can take. Then you have the Crusade Rules, which are for, the new play type called Crusade, which is all about building your army, etc., etc. It's basically a structured escalation league, but where you can get fun stuff. And then you have the data sheets, then the weapon profiles, and then the points values. Now, because I'm talking about GW, I can't really give pictures of any of these, because GW is notoriously lawsuit happy, so I'm just going to be able to talk about these. Now, ultimately, the Battleforge rules are the biggest part. Basically, the first thing is you can only have one captain and 2 lieutenants in each detachment in your army. Now, personally, I don't know why you would have more than one detachment, or why you would actually use 2 lieutenants and multiple captains, just because of how this edition, first off, has raised the points values, and second off, how this edition actually kind of penalizes you for having more than one detachment. Because you have to pay command points for each detachment you field. Your first detachment, where your Warlord is held, that one gets most of those command points refunded. But it's still there's a disincentive to using more than one detachment. Of course, you also have that every chapter has its own tactics. Now, these fall into one of two things. Either you're using one of the existing sets of chapter tactics, which in some ways are better than what you can do with picking your chapter tactics, 2 of your chapter tactics from the menu a little bit later. An example of this is the White Scars. They have the chapter tactic Lightning Assault. What this one does is it allows your units to assault the turn they fell back or the turn they advanced. And it allows them to fire assault weapons, things like assault plasma incinerators, flamers, things like that, without penalty on the turn that they advanced. Now, you cannot duplicate either of those exactly using the successor chapter tactics. Instead, you could use Rapid Assault, which lets you advance and not suffer a penalty. And you can use Tactical Withdrawal, which lets you charge on a turn you fell back. But there's nothing that lets you, in the Successor Chapter Tactics menu, select the ability to charge the turn you advanced. And this is how it is. You can get one of the 2 abilities generally pretty well. The second one, you can get close to it, but not on the same level. So, you have to actually look at what you're picking to decide how you want to do it. Now, the reason for this is each of these chapters have been around since the founding of the Space Marines. The Dark Angels, the White Scars, the Space Wolves, the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, the Iron Hands, the Ultramarines, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard. They are all first founding chapters. The Crimson Fists, the Black Templars, and I think even the Flesh Tearers are all second founding chapters. So they have their own little special abilities as well, that are the result of millennia of following their own doctrines, drilling them in, perfecting them. So, it makes sense that you cannot, through the menu approach, exactly duplicate any of them. Now, the chapter command section is the actual leaders, the upper muckety mucks of an individual Marine chapter. And these are the chapter master, the master of sanctity, master of the forge, things like that. Now, these each come with a Warlord trait option and a relic that only that member of the chapter, only the person bearing that position can take. The master, the chapter master, he has a number of special abilities in and of himself. He can basically do his aura effect during the command phase. He selects one friendly chapter core or chapter character unit within 6 inches until the start of your next command phase. Each time a model that unit makes an attack, you can reroll the hit roll. So basically, it's during the command phase, you look at the units that are around your chapter master, and one of them you go, oh, you get to reroll. You get to reroll these abilities, these attacks, until my next command phase. That applies to shooting, to melee, both in your turn and your opponent's turn. So, let's say, here's how the turn goes. Your force moves up, shoots. They get to reroll their attack rolls. Now, they heavily decimate that enemy squad, and then they charge it. And they manage to wipe it out because they got to reroll their attack rolls. Okay, then the next round comes along. They're charged. You spend a command point to fire Overwatch, and they get to reroll their attack roll. So they get 2 chances for each trooper to roll that magical 6. And then they're charged. The attack comes in, some of them survive, they fight back, and they get to reroll their attack rolls. I mean, this is a lot, but it gives them a lot more rerolls than a lot of other things, because it's any reroll, not just a roll of a 1. And to be able to do that, your chapter master costs 40 more points. He also gets the option of the Master of the Codex Warlord trait, which basically is, at the start of your command phase, roll a d6. On a 4-up, you get an additional command point. You always get a command point at the start of your command phase. This gets you an extra 1. And a relic available to him is called Angel Artifice. It gives him a save characteristic of 2+, and adds 1 to his wounds and toughness. Now, for my army, my Scarred Hydras, I am actually going to use this on my chapter master. I'm not going to use the Warlord trait. I'm going to use the relic, because my chapter master is in cataphractii armor, but they kind of took that option away. So rather than just saying I can't use this model anymore, I'm going to use the cataphractii armor as a WYSIWYG approach to his +1 wounds, +1 toughness. And of course, I'll be putting him in Terminator armor, which already has a 2+ armor save and a 5+ invulnerable. So that other portion is wasted But that +1 wound and +1 toughness puts him basically at the level of a Primaris captain in Gravis armor. But of course, you get to pick your Warlord traits as well. But my Scarred Hydras are a successor chapter to the White Scars. So I choose to take for them the Inheritors of the Primarch chapter tactic, the successor tactic, which basically means they get to take the White Scars chapter tactic, which for this army is really good, since they did away with a requirement that it has to be bikes getting stuff, and instead have made it any unit can fire assault weapons on the same turn it advances, and any unit can advance or fall back and charge. Now, there are a lot of stratagems, and I'm not really going to go into all of them. Let's just say that the big thing with them is they've changed everything. But some of my favorites are, of course, Hero of the Chapter. It allows you to... you spend it before you start the game, while you are mustering your army. And it lets you assign a Warlord trait to a character other than your Warlord. This is in addition to the Warlord trait your Warlord has. A great tactic as well is the Armor of Contempt. When an adversary's vehicle model would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound, is when you can use this, and it basically gives it a 5+, what's colloquially called a Feel No Pain. This is because something way back in ancient days of 40k was called Feel No Pain. It was after you take a wound, you get a chance to not suffer that wound. It's one of the only types of saves that come after your save. And, stratagems are going to be how you do stuff and how you change the course of the battle, because they are the things that literally turn things around, and they're the reason why you have command points. Now, for my own Warlord, you have Space Marine Warlord traits, and you have Vanguard Warlord traits. Vanguard are the Warlord traits for things in Phobos armor. My own personal choice is Iron Resolve for my Warlord. It gives him a +1 to his wounds, and gives him a 6-up Feel No Pain. Now, you're rolling a d6, so... that's one that I really, really like. The other option... that's pretty much the one I go with for him. Because I like my Warlord to be tough. To basically take more punishment than someone else. And when you combine it with Angel Artifice, this means he's got 2 wounds more than he would normally have. Now, his being in Terminator armor gives him 1 wound more than a normal Space Marine character, which puts him on a par with a Primaris captain. The Angel Artifice puts him on a par with being a Primaris captain in Gravis armor, but with a better save. And then the Iron Resolve puts him one more wound than a Primaris captain in Gravis, and gives him a 6+ feel no pain. So it takes a bit of a pounding to take him down, which is the whole point of him. Now there are a bunch of different relics that I could take. If my Warlord were like the captain from the Indominus box, you have the option of the Shield Eternal. It has all the effects of a normal Storm Shield. 4+ invulnerable save, and a +1 to the bearer's armor saves. But the Shield Eternal gives him a 5+ feel no pain. On a 5 or 6, whenever he loses a wound, any wound, he doesn't actually lose that wound. Now, here's the important thing to understand about this. Say I shot him, or you shot him, with a weapon that did d6 damage, and you rolled 6 wounds. On average, that means he managed to avoid 2 of these. Now, this is after his armor save, or invulnerable save, has been breached. I have seen characters in previous editions take a las cannon and then with a 6+ feel no pain roll some 6s and walk off getting hit by an anti-tank weapon. So the Shield Eternal would be a great one for a shield-bearing character. I have also used the Ghostweave Cloak quite effectively on a Librarian. It can only go on someone with Camo Cloak. It allows the character to ignore models and to ignore models as if they were not there, and allows him to have a -1 applied to any attacks made against him, either at range or melee. Now, I could go ahead and put this on my Librarian by spending a command point to basically allow another relic to be brought out. Note that if I'm fielding my Phobos Librarian for the Scarred Hydras, he would also be their Chief Librarian. You have the Librarius Discipline and the Obscuration Discipline. Frankly, the Obscuration Discipline sucks. It is not an offensive discipline. I mean, it can do offense, like Tenebrous Curse does cause 1 mortal wound. But the real power of Tenebrous Curse is that it halves the movement of the targeted unit and causes them to subtract 2 from their advance and charge rolls. Meanwhile, the Librarius Discipline has Psychic Fortress, which gives a friendly chapter unit within 6 inches of your Psyker a 5+ invulnerable save. It has a few things that pump up your characters, like Might of Heroes, if you pull it off until the start of your next psychic phase, Add 1 to that model's strength, toughness, and attacks characteristic. If a model has more than 1 toughness characteristic, use the lowest toughness characteristic of that unit when resolving. Yeah. But, and then of course you have the litanies of battle from your chaplains. These are things that you roll, and if you succeed on them, they cause buffs to nearby units. Like the Mantra of Strength actually inspires the priest, not anyone else. It adds 1 to the priest's attack and strength, and 1 to the damage of the priest's melee weapon. What the chapter approved rules are is the extra secondary objectives, like Codex Warfare. It basically gives you a bonus for each chapter doctrine you use. And, and it's like right in the middle of all these rules for how to build your army, you have the Crusade Rules. You're going to skip over these because these aren't helping you build your match play army. And you're going to get to the data. You're going to get to the data sheets right after those. But one of the things that these Space Marines have going for them are chapter doctrines. Or combat doctrines, sorry. And what these are, there's 3 doctrines. Devastator Doctrine, Tactical Doctrine, and Assault Doctrine. Devastator Doctrine is what you start with in the first round. Heavy weapons get a -1 to their armor penetration. So that means if you've got a heavy weapon that has an AP of -4, that AP becomes -5. Second round, you are into the Tactical Doctrine. This applies to rapid fire and assault weapons, and applies a -1 bonus to their armor penetration. The third round, you can either stay in Tactical Doctrine or go to Assault Doctrine. Fourth round, you must go into Assault Doctrine. Assault Doctrine applies the -1 benefit to melee and pistol weapons. And again, this is the Assault Doctrine you are in for the rest of the game. You cannot change out of this. And from here, now that you have determined the core construct for your army, the core upper level look, your chapter, your tactics, your warlord, what your warlord can do, what psychic powers any psychers, if any you have, are going to use. This is when you start actually building your army. And next month I'm going to talk about the finer details of your army construction. Now, the Necron Codex is pretty much similar, except it doesn't have combat doctrines, it has command protocols. Command protocols you select before your game, and you put them in a certain order, and they trigger in that order. Each turn, a different protocol is active. The other thing where Necrons differ is if you're choosing to do your own dynasty, you have the Circumstance of Awakening. My particular dynasty that I'm working on, I'm actually using Healthy Paranoia, which gives a plus 3 inches to the range of their weapons, except for flamer weapons. The second one you pick is the Dynastic Trait. And for this one, I'm kind of leaning towards Indomitable, which gives them a 6+ invulnerable save. And invulnerable save is basically, it doesn't matter what the armor pen of what you're being shot is, your save never gets worse than this. Is a good way to look at it. So, next month, we're going to look at the finer points of actually building your first army. And I'm going to be doing this by actually looking at the construction of one of my existing armies. And how I'm planning to use it and why each unit I'm picking is being used. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.